Today, you're going to learn 6 watercolor techniques. For each of these techniques, you're going to need your watercolor paints, a set of paint brushes, which includes a flat tip and a round tip, a cup of water, and for the stamping, you'll want archival or memento ink. And of course, because watercoloring can be a little messy, you'll want a nice all-purpose mat to do your painting on. I created this background color by mixing 2 colors. And how you do this is first get your brush nice and wet and choose your first color. For me, it was this red. And what I did is I got the red nice and wet, and then I laid it down here on one of these circular depressions. I cleaned off my brush, and then I chose my second color, and that is this magenta color. And so I got that nice and wet, and then I mixed it here with the red color. And then from here, I just sort of eyeballed it. I thought, well, that looked a little too red, so I grabbed a little bit more of the magenta, mixed it in, and then when I was done, I wanted to lighten it a little bit, so I just added water to kind of dilute it down so it wasn't quite as dark. And to show you, this is the red color and this is the magenta color. And then when I mixed them, it created a color that was in between the two. On this same card, I created a watercolor gradient. It goes from dark to light. And how I did this was I took a flat tip brush and I got it wet, and then on my watercolor paper I just spread a little bit of that water on the area I wanted to color. The next step, get your brush wet again and choose your color, and then you'll want to brush across the same area that you had wet before. You'll see it kind of spreads on that area, and this is pretty even. So in order to make it a little bit darker at the top, I got my brush wet again, and I went back, and I just brushed the top portion, so it makes it darker than the bottom. And to create an even more obvious gradient, I got my brush wet again, and just with water, I brushed across. That way I can smooth out the area where they meet, and I can lighten the lower area. And there's my gradient. The last thing I did on this card was stamping. And all I had to do was make sure my gradient was dry. And then I took my stamp and I used archival ink. You can also use memento ink. I got it nice and inked up. And then I just stamped directly on my gradient. On this next card, I created this cool splatter effect. And how I did that was I took my round tip brush and I got it wet, and then I dipped it in the color that I wanted, and then I lightly tapped on my brush, and the closer you go, the bigger the splatter. The second technique I did on this card was watercoloring a stamped image. And the way you do that is first, you stamp your image using archival or memento ink, and you let it dry for a few minutes. Once that's done, you'll take your round tip brush, get it wet, and then wet the entire image. You'll notice I'm not too worried about staying within the lines, and that's because I actually fussy cut this image out. So it makes it a lot easier not having to worry about that. All right, the next step is to choose your lightest color first, get that wet, and then lightly dab it on your image. You'll see that as you dab, it spreads because water was already added to the image. And then you will get your brush wet again, and then choose your darker color, and once again lightly dab and let the color spread. Once you're done with that, go back with just water so that you can smooth out the transitions and make sure everything is nice and colored. And then just let this dry, cut it out, and you'll have a lovely watercolor image. On my last card, I have 3 beautifully colored butterflies that were all created using the same technique. For this technique, I cut out this butterfly using my Cricut, and I used watercolor paper. And I'm going to color it using this round tip brush. The first step is to get the butterfly nice and wet. And then once that's done, you'll actually start with your darkest color first. So get your darkest color nice and wet, and then just lightly dab, and you'll see that the color spreads as you do that. Once you're done with your darkest color, go to your medium color next, and again dab on those white spaces to get it nice and colored. And then when you're done, you'll go to your lightest color last. And the reason you'll want to do this is you'll see that as you go, it kind of spreads and overtakes everything. And if you use a dark color for that, it will color over your other colors. So that's why it's actually best to use your lightest color last, so that you can still see the other colors. And then when you're done, you can go back and just get a little wet, so that way you can kind of spread the color to the white spaces. And then you just let it sit and dry, and when you're done, you'll have beautifully colored butterflies.